Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the March 9th Garbage and Recycling Advisory Committee meeting. This presentation is going to be recorded. It is posted to the Washington County Solid Waste and Recycling webpage 1 week after the meeting subsides. You will be joining the meeting automatically.
Leticia, necesito permiso para grabar.
Oh, hold on. Sorry.
No, yo necesito permiso para grabar.
I'm hearing multiple channels over top of what I'm saying.
¿Le puedes preguntar a Aaron o a Kathy que me autoricen a grabar?
We're going to hold time for public comments throughout this session this evening. This evening, we are offering translation services. At the bottom of your screen, if you hover over interpretation, you can select either the English or the Spanish channel. And for some meeting best practices, we encourage everyone to speak clearly and in a normal tone. Try to limit it to one person speaking at a time. And use the raise the hand feature as it is available for clarification. Additionally, for tonight, we also have the Q&A option available. And as I mentioned earlier, there's 2 times for public comment on the agenda. Only the committee chair may recognize a public attendee. You can use the raise the hand feature. And once admitted, we will also take the time for those who maybe have called in or in the attendee pool to come off mute and make their comments. And with that, I'm going to quit sharing my screen and we will roll into a roll call. And actually, I forgot one housekeeping issue. I need to give permission to Ricardo so he can record within the Spanish channel. So one moment.
I was able to take care of it, Aaron.
Okay. Great, thank you. Okay, so we'll do some roll call this evening. First up is Ashvin.
Ashvin Nagaraja, Chair, Public Member. Hi, everybody.
Leslie.
Hi there, Leslie Albert, Public Member, Unincorporated Washington County. I think I remembered everything.
Hannah, I believe, is absent this evening. Tom.
I'm here. Thank you.
Myra.
Hola, estoy aquí.
Pete. I believe I saw him as here this evening. Sue is absent and Vinod.
Present. Good evening, everyone.
Great. And with that, I will turn it over.
We lost some audio
meeting.
for Aaron. I think we have Pete and Sandra that are here too. We didn't pick up the audio if you said it.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me now? No?
Yes,
Yep.
we can. I think it seems to cut out.
Okay. So Sandra's here, and then I also marked Pete as here as well.
Present.
Here.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Aaron. You want to roll into program updates, Tom?
Sure. Let's do some quick program updates. Kind of start with the update on that Vinod referenced earlier, the House Bill 3220, which is the Modernizing Oregon's Electronics Recycling Program. So Oregon eCycles had a hearing in Salem yesterday. It was a positive hearing. There was, I testified on behalf of Washington County in support of the legislation. There was support from Association of Oregon Recyclers, the Oregon Refuse and Recycling Association, the Consumer Technology Alliance, I think, which is like a technology manufacturers association. and DQ and Lane County. So there was a lot of support. It went really well. The bill has already been scheduled for a work session next week, which means the committee in the House Committee on Energy and Environment will vote on moving it to the floor. It looks like a very positive bill based on the support and no opposition lining up at this point. So I think we will see it definitely move to the House, the full House, and see where it goes from there. So we're looking forward to that. Just a little bit of background on that one. Last couple of years have been turbulent in the Oregon E-Cycles program. They had basically DQs. The current legislation requires DQ to set collection targets that mandate the state contractor to collect certain amounts of electronics. The contractor essentially overperformed on the collection targets, and so proposed closing down sites to not, because they were allowed to close down sites because they collect more material than the target. There was a pretty big pushback. Some of the sites in Southern Oregon and on the coast were on the proposed chopping block. There was the kind of a bargain and a temporary fix and a promise to come back with legislation. We did lose Far West Recycling in Washington County. And I recently learned, I didn't know this, the only two sites that actually did get cut were Far West Recycling. So we were one of the only communities that actually took a loss of a major depot in our facility through that program. So we're really supportive of a fix because that doesn't seem reasonable. It doesn't seem like if you do a good job recycling, you should have your recycling opportunities taken away from you. And that is definitely baked into this new legislation. So we're looking forward to seeing that through and supporting it however we can. The other legislation we talked a little bit about last month, I don't have too many updates on those. There's been a couple hearings on right to repair. There's some pretty strong opposition from industry, like the phone manufacturers and those types of industries. And the zero waste package is also received a hearing, but I haven't seen any other action going forward. So I'll be sure to keep you in the loop if we see something move and move quickly, potentially, as things tend to do that sometimes in the legislature. And if you're interested, you can reach out if you're interested in anything in particular. Next update, we are rate review season is going to officially kick off on the 15th. So next week, the detailed cost reports are due to the county from the certificated haulers. That means we will start the journey of reviewing the hauler financial cost reports and working with your committee on a rate review recommendation. I'm going to read through a timeline here. It's a lot of dates, but just kind of give you a flavor of what's coming. On the 15th, I mentioned the DCRs are due. On the March 22nd, the county will work with Marina and Company, who is our CPA firm, to support us to identify the haulers that we're going to do site visits with. We always do site visits on the top 3 by revenue haulers. And if we see anomalies or other issues in the detailed cost reports, we can add, bring in other providers to do site visits. It's not like an audit, it's more of a reconcile and confirm and make sure the data agrees with the supporting documentation behind the scenes. March 23rd through April 7th timeline, Marina is going to conduct those site visits at those service provider establishments. On April 21st, we will start to see some proposed rate adjustments coming out of the composite findings of the financial analysis. So essentially, if the haulers are operating above 10%, we would be looking at proposing rate reductions. And if they're operating with a return below the targets, we would be looking at potential rate increases. We get a final composite with proposed adjustments at the end of April. And then in the beginning of May, we'll be negotiating and talking with the Hauler Association about what those findings are and where those rate increases might land. We will send notice out for this committee's meeting on May 11th, which is 1 week before we're going to hold the meeting in May. And that notice goes out to an interested parties list and offers the opportunity to provide feedback to the rate review process at this committee's meeting on May. On May 18th, we've asked that your committee meet 1 week later than normal in May so that we have a little more time to review those financials and present a composite finding to you and a recommendation. And we presumably receive a recommendation from your committee. We turn around on May 30th and we submit materials to the Board of Commissioners work session would be going to work session on June 13th. That's another opportunity for us to present the findings to the board and receive the board's direction. We would present your committee's recommendation to the board then too. Then on June 20th, the materials will be posted online on the board's website for a June 27th meeting, which is another opportunity for community members to receive notice of potential adjustments in the board action, which would take place on June 27th. And that would be another public comment opportunity. So lots of dates there. If you're fascinated, I would be happy to send you the detailed timeline. If you just want to see what we're going to bring on the 18th, we're happy to do that as well. So as much, just let us know how, what information you want on that front. I will also add, go ahead, Asher.
Is there like opportunity for like early engagement? Is that why you're giving us the timeline? Like if we want to see the data earlier in the process or?
Well, I'm kind of giving you the timeline just to kind of spell out the process and what's going to happen. If you're interested in early engagement, we're happy to kind of see where it might make sense for you to get information and plug in. There is some confidentiality requirements in terms of the individual data from the individual service providers. So before we aggregate, it's challenging for us to kind of share the financials from each individual, if that makes sense.
Yep.
Go ahead, Vinod.
I'm sure you're probably going to include it going forward, but do you have any idea how the like the assisted rate pay has affected or will? Is that already figured out how to factor that in?
So this year's rate review is a review of actual financial data from calendar year 22, and the reduced rate program started on January 1st of 23. So we won't see the actual data until next year's rate review for calendar year 23. We are going to be working with the haulers to include a new temporary quarterly report to kind of track uptake data and understand the kind of shift in revenue that we're seeing from the reduced rate program participants, if that makes sense. So there's going to be some lag in terms of the rate review catching up to that reduced rate program. We have seen signups, so I think Aaron was sharing with me, there's over 50 or with Just Waste Management, I believe was a number I heard, which is good that folks are learning about it and signing up for it. Thank you. Lollipop stick was handed to me, so that is a bad sign for the rest of the meeting. We've also talked about at our last meeting that we are planning to consider residential food scraps program in this year's rate review. So that would also be coming to your committee on May 18th meeting. In order to achieve that, we would be recommending proposed administrative rule changes, which would be a separate item on the, a separate item on the committee meeting. And we can talk more about that later. The also just kind of regarding food scraps, we've done some work, some data analysis to kind of understand what's in our waste stream and what we might be able to capture. And we're trying to use some of these estimates to help Recology, that would be the primary facility taking the feedstock from unincorporated, to project new tonnage coming in. So we're looking at our system right now for yard debris only is collecting about 17,000 tons a year of yard debris. And based on DEQ waste composition studies and applying that to total tons of garbage collected, we estimate that there's about 10,000 tons of food in our garbage in the system. So if we were like the super awesome, every ounce of food went into the compost bin and not the garbage, there would be potential of 28,000 tons of material getting shifted around from a facility that can take yard debris only to a facility that takes yard debris with food scraps. But we know that we're not going to capture 100%. Not everybody's going to participate. And those that do participate, we see significantly lower capture rates. I think Portland generously estimates they capture 25% of the food in the garbage. And we're actually looking at potentially even smaller numbers of 10 to 15% for some of the small jurisdictions on the west side. So in that sense, we're thinking we're going to get about 1,000 of those tons of food waste out of the garbage in this first couple of years. And that would shift about 18,000 tons over to Recology. So it's a little bit easier for them to adjust their material intake if that's going to be a big shift for them. So I know there is some stress. Hyla highlighted this for us at the last meeting, that processing capacity for food and yard debris mixed is one of our shortcomings, I guess, or less resilient in the long run. And so I think it's important to get these estimates right and make sure that we can, we have the capacity. And Recology has assured us that they can take those types of figures. Also on the topic of kind of what's coming in the potential rulemaking, we're also looking at a couple small tweaks for a reduced rate program. So not necessarily tweaks, but adding notification requirements that we're considering about if folks are in arrears or getting late notices from their haulers, that the haulers need to notify them about the availability of the program. And also if they're getting their service terminated, they need to be notified of the opportunity for the reduced rate program as well. And so you might see that in there. And a couple small fixes for the Recycle Plus program related to bags and electronic notification. So those are some things you might see coming up. That's what I have. And I will pass it to Kathy, which I probably just took all of her updates as well.
Thanks, Tom. Only a few. Continuing on the topic of the admin rules, we're also the current rules have a placeholder date saying that Recycle Plus has to be offered to urban multifamily customers beginning July 1. So there will need to be rules that turn that on. So that's another topic that you can expect to see. As a reminder, there's no meeting on April 13th. Instead, it's an opportunity to attend the county's volunteer appreciation celebration. It starts at 5:30. I've heard there's going to be a gift basket raffle. Don't know what's in them, but it could be something good. And I got a message today that they're encouraging everybody to register by the 5th if you can, so they can plan for it. So hopefully we'll see a lot of you there if you're able to come. And as Tom mentioned, the May 18th meeting is a week later than usual, and it's primarily rules and rates. Then in June, I expect to be able to schedule the discussion from that will include a few of our garbage and recycling service providers around the extra fees, like the Smiley Can fee or the extra bag bundle, the extra, the one-off commercial fees that some of the Dropbox fees, and we'll talk about like what they are and how the various service providers actually assess that fee. Do they take a picture? Do they just use driver notes? Do they enter it in the computer, onboarding computer, or are they handwritten? I think it'll be a good discussion to kind of see how that's handled across the system. Let's see. Oh, and then for the May meeting, for their very first meeting, we expect to fill the 2 vacant GRAC member positions, public member positions. So hopefully we expect to go to the board in April with our recommendations. And then as well as we have one that Sandra, that's her term is ending, but she's eligible to serve an additional term. So all of that will go to the board in April. And then if all goes well, we'll have new members beginning with that May 18th meeting. And one plea for the May meeting in particular, it's really important that I hear from you guys as to whether you can be there, because the rules and the rates are action items and they require a quorum. So that means we have to have a sufficient number of voting members in order to make the action actually valid according to our bylaws. So please let me know when we get closer. As Tom said, we'll post the materials a week before on the May 11th, but it's more critical to actually know so that we can plan for it for those meetings that actually have action items. And other than that, I think that's all I have right now.
Great, thanks, Kathy. And thanks, Tom, for dates. Keep moving so we can roll into the presentation as soon as possible. Let's see if we have opportunity for oral communication from anyone in the public attendees. So I think if they want to raise their hand, we can promote them to get their question. They can either ask it now or at the end of the presentation.
I am not seeing any hands.
Cool. So we can go into the presentation. So Eric, you're going to take over. Thanks for joining us. Can I ask before you start, are you okay with questions throughout the presentation, or do you have some natural stopping points?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Please interject with questions. The way that my screen's format, I often can't see if something's been put in the Q&A. So just let me know if there's something that pops up in there. And yeah, feel free to interject at any point, and we'll just kind of roll through and talk about the bottle bill. So would it help? I can start with just a little bit of background about myself, and then kind of we can dive into OBRC and what we do and who we are. I'm Eric Chambers. I have been at OBRC since December of 2020, so a bit over 2 years that I've been in this space. I help OBRC with our policy work, our community relations work, and some of our customer service and public relations work as well. So anything kind of outward facing is in my purview at OBRC. And prior to that, I actually worked in local government for 14 years. So I was the government relations director at the city of Gresham and worked in public policy at the local level for a long time. So I'm nowhere near as much of a local solid waste and recycling expert as you all are. But I did touch on some of the policy items a bit in my previous role. So it's an area that I have some familiarity with. I'll dive in here. Let me try to share my screen, and I can roll through a few slides that just help kind of unpack things. Give me 1 second to get my screens right. Okay, if I swap those and then I change that to gallery, I can see more of you. And can you all see my screen now? Excellent. All right. So we'll start with just kind of a brief timeline of the bottle bill. The first thing you'll notice here is that it's not drawn to scale. The first 40 years or so are a small piece of it on the left-hand side, and then kind of most of the things that have occurred over time have happened kind of since 2009 in terms of the bigger changes or innovations to the bottle bill. So, and this will help sort of unpack what OBRC is and why we exist. So in 1971, Oregon became the first state in the nation to approve a bottle bill. And basically it was on the heels of refillable packaging transitioning out and single-use packaging coming in. And it was pointed specifically at soda bottles and beer cans and bottles that were now being put on the shelf in single-use packaging. That was causing litter problems because consumers didn't have an incentive to get the materials back to a good outcome. And so as policymakers noticed the proliferation of litter from single-use packaging, they sought to address it with a bottle bill. And so it was really simple. The original legislation, it said that beer and soda cans and bottles were worth 5 cents if you took them back to where you bought them. So grocery stores were required to receive them. Large grocery stores were required to receive 144 containers per person per day, and convenience stores were required to receive 50 containers per person per day. And again, just beer and soda at that time. And then on the back end, the legislature required that beverage distributors, so the companies that are delivering beverages to grocery stores and putting them on the shelves, that the distributors share in the responsibility of the packaging. And so it required that the beverage distributors go to each of the locations that they service with full product and that they pick up the used packaging of just their brands and types. So, Coors was separated into Coors, Anheuser-Busch separated into Anheuser-Busch, Pepsi into Pepsi, Coke into Coke, and so on. So the grocery stores had a lot of sortation. There was a lot of, if you were around in 1971 or the early days of the bottle bill, you might remember them sorting containers into different bags at that time. And so it's interesting. Again, we show the first 40 years. It's a small blip on this, but I spent a lot of time talking about them on this slide because there was a lot that was happening behind the scenes as that was taking place. So the beverage distributors, even though it's sort of a fierce competitive economy, realized that they shared in this back-end stewardship responsibility to pick up their containers from each of their stores and to reimburse the store for the refund that store had paid to the consumer. And so the beverage distributors in these individual markets started figuring out how they could cooperate. So I grew up in Toledo, which is a small town just inland from Newport on the coast. And so you can think about this as the Pepsi distributor at JC Thriftway in Toledo telling the Coke distributor, hey, I'm going to be there on Monday. Why don't I pick up for both of us? You're going to be there on Thursday. You can pick up for both of us, and then we'll figure out the fund accounting on the refunds that we owe the store, down the road. And so it saved them both a trip, and so that sort of immediately made sense from an efficiency and cooperation perspective. And so those regional partnerships developed until there were formal cooperatives that were serving in Portland and Salem and Eugene and Central Oregon and Medford. And so, again, this just got sort of bigger and more formal as time went on. And then in 2007, the legislature added bottled water to the bottle bill. And if you're familiar with the sort of bottled water industry, there's just a million brand holders and drop shippers and different brands and companies that are touching it. And so it's really hard to figure out who the responsible distributors are and how the product is getting onto the shelf. And so that kind of broke the regional cooperative model because it was really hard to differentiate one water bottle from another from a regionality perspective. And so at that time, the distributor cooperatives that were serving these individual areas all got together and formed one statewide entity, which is the Oregon Beverage Recycling Cooperative. So we're an entity that is a cooperative of beverage distributors across the state of Oregon to fulfill their underlying responsibilities in the bottle bill, which again, that very base responsibility is to go to those stores and pick up containers and reimburse the stores. But as time has developed, the legislature allowed for other collaborative partnerships between grocery stores and OBRC as well in terms of redemption centers and the green bag program. And we'll talk a little bit about how those items have worked and evolved over time as well. And so a couple important things happened when OBRC formed. It no longer mattered where in the state you purchased a beverage, and it no longer mattered where you returned it for a refund. And so it wasn't a big deal anymore if you bought a Safeway Select container and returned it to a Fred Meyer, or if you bought a container in Medford and returned it in Portland, because all of the deposits were flowing into one entity, which is OBRC, and all of the refunds were getting reimbursed or paid directly to consumers out of the same entity, which is OBRC. And so that is what unlocked the modern conveniences that you see in terms of redemption centers and the bag program and things like that. And we'll talk again. I'll talk a little bit more about how both of those items work. So OBRC was created in 2009. We opened our first redemption center in 2010 in Wood Village. And then a couple interesting things along the way. We'll talk about this more, but when you have one statewide network with a high redemption rate, you have a high degree of confidence that the material that's out there is going to come back and that it's going to come back through your system. And so OBRC launched the nation's first statewide refillable bottle program in 2016 and put those into the market. So we have some great craft brewing partners that use those bottles and they come back through our system. And then in 2017, this is a really important point along the timeline. I'll show you a graph that displays that. But refund value went from a nickel to a dime, which had a really positive impact on the redemption rate. And then in 2018, the legislature did another container expansion. So up until that point, it was just beer, soda, and bottled water. In 2018, they added nearly everything else. So the bottle bill now includes everything except for products with milk as a first ingredient, wine, and liquor. And the legislature last year added wine in cans to the bottle bill starting in 2025. So that's on the horizon. And then in 2020, the retail bag drop program expanded, and in sort of its technical name and statutes, the Dealer Redemption Center program. These are often the bag drop locations that you see at places like Fred Meyer or Safeway, Albertsons, New Seasons, Basic Market, those types of places. And so I'll talk a little bit more about how that program works as well. But we saw a much expanded use of that program when the legislature changed the policy on that. I mentioned that just the motivating factor of going to a dime, but the redemption rate in Oregon had actually slipped to around 64% between 2010 and 2015 or so. When the refund value was increased to a dime, it shot up 35% and crested over 82%. It's now, the redemption rate in Oregon now is routinely between 80 and 90%, which is often either the highest or close to the highest in the nation. In 2021, we had the highest redemption rate in the nation. And just looking at data that we're about to publish for our 2022 annual report, I suspect that will be the case again in 2022. I mentioned container expansion, but when you look at the beverage aisle now, it's just about everything. If it's in glass, metal, or plastic packaging, your favorite kombucha is a bottle bill container now, and is redeemable through the system. And then just at a very high level, I've mentioned some of this data, but in Oregon, we get about 2 billion containers a year returned. That's an 80 to 90% redemption rate. OBRC represents about 300 member distributors, so a lot of industry cooperation through OBRC. We're a big employer in the green economy. We've got about 530 employees across the state, from bottle drop redemption center employees to route ops truck drivers to processing plant employees to software engineers for some of the kind of cool innovations that we've been working on. So it's a big vertically integrated program. There's still about 2,000 retail sites, return points that consumers can access. About 450 of those use reverse vending machines that are supplied through OBRC. In the bottle drop network, there's now about 96 places across the state of Oregon that you can drop off green bags. And that number has been growing by 10 to 12 locations a year for the last few years. So that continues to be an area of growth. We have 26 full service redemption centers, soon to be 27. We're working on opening up a redemption center in McMinnville this year. So we'll add another one to the network there. And then we have 6 main processing plants that process materials and compact them, and all provided as an industry stewardship program with no taxpayer dollars included. I mentioned our redemption centers, but
Eric,
sorry,
could I ask a question on that one? Can you talk
bet.
a little bit about the funding model of OBRC? Is it funded from the unredeemed, the remaining 7%, or is it funded from fees from the partners?
Yeah, so both. The first operational funding in the system is the value of unclaimed refunds being reinvested into it, and then the rest of the delta is covered by system revenues like member fees, retail partnerships, and those types of things. So it's a little bit of both. The value of unclaimed refunds can vary year to year. If the redemption, there's a big difference between the redemption rate at 80% or at 90%, and so that changes as a percentage of the overall funding, but the entire value of unclaimed refunds are invested in the operation of the system. So in a way, it's a really interesting model where the sort of recycling sloth helps support the system first, and consumers who participate then don't face any costs to do so. And then the beverage industry covers the rest of the costs for the program. So our bottle drop redemption centers, this was the first, again, that underlying return to retail responsibility is still the backbone of the system. But after OBRC formed, the legislature looked at it and said, okay, retailers, we're open to a different idea as long as there's still good consumer return options that are available. And so they allowed the creation of these bottle drop redemption centers where if a redemption center locates in an area, then the retailers that are within the first 2 miles of that redemption center no longer have to take containers back. And instead they're returned through the redemption center. The consumer gets to take 350 containers per person per day back to a redemption center instead of 144. So they can take more containers back to the center. And then the retailers that are in the outer ring, so between 2 miles and around 3.5 miles, have a reduced requirement down to 24 containers per person per day. So if you just have, a couple dozen that you want to get returned and you don't want to have to go to the redemption center, then that's still an option in that second layer of the convenience zone. And then our redemption centers also were the kind of first introduction of our green bag program. And so each redemption center processes green bags as well. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but that was kind of the first introduction of green bags in Oregon through those redemption centers. The green bag program, you may already be familiar with this, but it's super easy. You take one of these bags right here. You can put glass, plastic, metal, all in the same bag. You put a sticker on your bag that has a QR code on it that associates it with your account, just like that. And you can drop that off again at any of the 96 bag drop locations across the state. Your bag will be counted and credited to your bottle drop account within 7 days. It's often much quicker, within a couple of days, but during our really peak volume, that can slow down a little bit. And then you can redeem funds as cash at any of our redemption centers and at any bag drop location. So any of the retailers that do bag drops, you can print a cash voucher inside the retailer and you can get your cash on the spot there. At Northwest Grocery Association participating retailers, so your Safeway, Albertsons, and Fred Meyer stores, if you choose to use your refunds to shop a store credit, they'll add an extra 20% to the value through Bottle Drop Plus, which is a popular feature for a lot of consumers as well. And then I mentioned the legislation that sort of expanded the bag program in 2020. But the legislature said, okay, if you're a grocer that's not within a convenience zone of a redemption center, but you still want to reduce your individual take back requirement, you can do that if you provide a new convenient option for consumers to return containers. And so that's the dealer redemption center program. So through this program, there's a bag drop site that's located right at the grocery store. Consumers can drop off their bags. There's no limits on the bags or fees associated with it. There's a kiosk inside where they can print their bag tag stickers. They can get cash. They can review their accounts and do account activity. This is an example of that kiosk. You've probably seen those in the stores that you shop at. And so again, this program has really grown. I think we actually have 65 locations now, and it continues to grow at 10 to 12 a year. We can get pretty creative about the format. This is on the right hand side here. This is actually a shipping container that's the drop facility at New Seasons in Ladd's Edition. And another photo of the loyalty kiosk inside. We also have a mobile application where you can log into your account, access a mobile account card, see all of your account activity, so you can see when your bags were credited, when you made withdrawals. There's a location finder, and then you can purchase the green bags at any location that you can drop them off. So at any redemption center or retail bag drop location. They're $2 a box, priced to just make sure that we're not the cheapest, kitchen garbage bag on the market. Again, they're on the shelf there at any store that takes bags. Another couple examples of the types of drop locations that are out there. This one's a Safeway in St. Helens. That's another photo of the drop location at New Seasons. Sometimes they're built right into the store. A lot of the Fred Meyer stores had bottle and can areas because they were built after 1971. And so those just kind of got remodeled into dealer redemption centers in many cases. And the program has just absolutely gone through the roof. So we processed about 5.2 million bags in 2019. That jumped to 8.3 million bags in 2020. That jumped again to 11.2 million bags in 2021. And we're now, knocking at the door at 930,000 bottle drop account holders, so approaching 1 million. There's probably 1.8 million households in Oregon, so starting to reach a point where that represents a pretty high percentage of households in the state. That's a photo from our plant training room during peak summer volume. So that's not a great look for the MRF operators amongst us. Will look at that photo and say that doesn't look great. But to get a sense of the scale of what's coming in, that's here at our Clackamas plant. And I can actually show you a live view of that floor here in a little bit. And then, so this graph just displays a lot of the big changes that have happened in the last dozen years. So as recently as like 12 years ago in 2010, 100% of containers returned in Oregon were returned through retail stores as individual containers. So either hand counts or reverse vending machines. And there were about 1 billion containers a year returned. And so the blue shading here represents large retailers. The yellow shading represents convenience stores, smaller retailers. And then the teal shading represents the bottle drop network. And so if you watch over time, in a 12-year period, we went from 100% of container returns going through small and large retailers to today, where around 81.4% of returns are coming back through the bottle drop network, so through our redemption centers in the bag program, and under 20%, around 19%, are coming back through retail grocery stores. So there's been a real change in the way that containers come back and a shift in volume. At the same time, you see the immediate impacts of going from 5 cents to 10 cents and the container expansion that occurred in 2018. So in just the last 6 years or so, we went from processing around 1 billion containers a year to today, where we process over 2 billion containers a year. So volume has doubled at the same time that we went from 0 to 80 in terms of the pathways that it's coming back. So this slide is really cool, and it shows some neat stuff that's happening in the system, but it also wears me out. Really busy. And then just a sense of the kind of the network. Again, we're everywhere in Oregon and continuing to expand. But this is a high-level look at where our redemption centers, bag drop locations, and processing plants are located. We're actually actively looking for property in the Dalles right now, and looking at Hood River for potential bag drop opportunities. So trying to fill in the last piece of the Columbia River Gorge there. We just opened our North Bend Coos Bay Redemption Center in December. So that's a new addition. And we plan to open a green bag drop facility in Brookings this year also, and a green bag drop facility in the Dalles. So a couple of those gaps still kind of getting filled in geographically, while the program also continues to expand in some of the more developed urban areas of the state as well. And then this is kind of one of my favorite slides, but if you're familiar with Oregon, and you probably are, if you took a satellite image at night, the blue shading here is likely what you would see illuminated, right? Like this is sort of where development is in Oregon, where people live and how the population distributes. And the small blue dots are representative of bottle drop account holders. And so you can kind of see, across the population areas from the coast to the Willamette Valley, the Rogue Valley, Klamath Falls, Ontario, Central Oregon, Hermiston, Pendleton, over there. You can see the growth of bottle drop networks, and then each of these roads with population areas between those places, you can see the distribution of account holders. So it's kind of fun to think about sort of the statewide scope that it has grown to represent. This is not the most beautiful slide ever, but I thought it might be helpful to take a quick glance at Washington County and look at where the drop locations are in your area. We have full service redemption centers in Beaverton, Tigard, and Forest Grove. And then we have dealer redemption centers or bag drop locations at retailers is the orange shading there. So, and most of those have been deployed just in the last couple of years. And so a lot of bag access that's growing in Washington County as well. And then the Blue Bag program is a really cool element of our system. So we realized that with this return network that, since I was a kid sort of growing up in Oregon, bottles and cans and like the can drive has always been part of the nonprofit experience. If you were saving up for a field trip or a community event, it wasn't at all uncommon to ask people to donate their containers. So we took kind of the bottle and can drive of the 1980s and developed it into a really mature program where we actually now have over 5,000 nonprofits who are signed up in our Bottle Drop Give program to raise funds through bottles and cans. And so they have a bag program that works just like the Green Bag program, except the bags are blue and the stickers have the name of the nonprofit on them. And they can hand them out to their supporters at community events. The supporters just fill them up. I've got one for the Toledo swimming pool hanging in my garage right now that I'm working on. And when they're full, they just drop them off at any of the bag drop locations, or the nonprofits will often offer to come pick them up. But collectively, nonprofits in Oregon raised over $5.1 million each of the last 2 years through this program. And so it's really cool to see the reach that it has. The Bottle Drop Give program is in my department. And so I approve all of the outgoing checks that the nonprofits request, out of their accounts. And there's so many checks, but it's really awesome to see every pet rescue and town festival in the state is connected in with this thing. And so you get a real sense of the social fabric that it represents. And it's neat. It's cool to see all the school PTAs and food pantries and everything in between that's supported by the program. So just kind of taking a step back, why does this work? What results in kind of the high redemption rates that we see? And really, I think one of the really important elements of Oregon's system is that there's a motivation for all sorts of different people. You might be motivated by the original mission of the bottle bill to cut down on litter or the kind of recycling and environmental outcomes that it represents. But if you're not motivated by that, you might just be motivated by getting your dime back. There's the financial connection to that. And as an extension to that, motivated to get the extra 20% through the Bottle Drop Plus program. This is the only place in the world that you can link an account like this directly to a college savings plan account. So you might be motivated to save for your kids' college in kind of a creative way. There's a lot of families that will use that as a way to teach their kids about not just recycling, but about kind of the responsibility to invest in their education and be part of that. And none of those things might motivate you. So you can sort of think about this person that doesn't care about the money and doesn't care about the environment and doesn't have anybody to save for their education, isn't price sensitive at the grocery store. But they're probably associated with some sort of something, a community festival, a hunting enthusiast group, you name it. And somebody somewhere, some tenacious nonprofit will put a blue bag in their hands and say, hey, we're doing a can drive for something that you care about. And maybe that will pull them in terms of the social pressure or the opportunity to support a group. So there's just a lot of sticky motivations, so to speak, that kind of help pull people in. And it's popular. We do regular polling. We use DHM Research, which is located in Portland, kind of the preeminent public affairs research firm in Oregon. This is from a survey that we did in January of 2022, but 95% of Oregonians are familiar with our container return system. So nearly everybody, and of those who are familiar with it, 97% continue to agree with the statement that it's good for Oregon. So it's neat to see something that sort of brings lots of people together, urban, rural, Republicans, Democrats, non-affiliated voters, all into kind of one thing that we still agree on. A really important element of our system is where our material goes. So we're really proud of these outcomes in particular, but 100% of our plastic is processed right here in Oregon. It goes to the ORPET facility in St. Helens, which is a wash and flake facility, as they say. So it gets, the PET gets grinded up into the flake product that you see in this person's hand right here and gets washed. And then it gets sent to be the raw material for new products again. So in the case of beverage containers, that is something like this, these little pellets that can be used to create beverage containers again. it really importantly, it retains a grade A quality. So it's kind of a food grade quality because it's beverage containers coming in and kind of sequestered with other food grade packaging the whole time. All of our glass in our system, we have about 90 million pounds of glass that comes in every year. And it goes to the glass to glass facility that's by the Portland Airport, that building that has that like weird roof if you're driving on 205. All of our glass goes there and gets turned into new bottles again, including our refillable bottles. And really that's kind of the backbone of the glass that's used in the wine industry in the Northwest. So a lot of the wine bottles that you see from local vineyards are supplied from that facility and are actually made from recycled bottle built glass, which is kind of cool. And then all of our aluminum's processed domestically. We don't have any smelters in the Northwest, but so it gets shipped by rail to the Midwest and the South, where the aluminum smelters and can manufacturers are predominantly located, and is processed in the United States. I mentioned ORPET, but just to put kind of a finer point on that, when you look at the amount of plastic that comes through the system, it's a lot. And the national average recovery rate for plastic bottles is around 35%. That includes bottle bill states, and so states that don't have a bottle bill, that number is even lower. But OBRC's plastic recovery rate is around 83.3%, maybe a little bit higher than that for 2022. We'll see how those numbers come in. But just a pretty staggering difference between kind of what you see in places that don't have deposit return systems and what you see in places that do. A really important element of that, an increasingly important element of that, is that state legislatures across the country are looking at minimum recycled content policies. So they're mandating that a certain percentage of a new beverage container be made from recycled content. But if there's not enough recycled content in the market at a high enough gradation to satisfy those requirements, then industry's not able to meet those requirements. And so it's really important to get the yield and the quality of material to be able to help support that circularity of the containers. And I mentioned our refill program, but it's like there's a little bit of a Goldilocks issue where you have to be big enough that you care about your packaging, but still small enough that you can separate your Oregon distribution predominantly from your national distribution. But it's a really cool program. There's these standardized 500 milliliter bottles and also a standardized 12-ounce bottle that we can make available to local craft brewers. And so we have, a lot of beer brewers. We have, in fact, 2 wine producers who voluntarily participate in the program, Cooper's Hall and Pierce Wines. Cider makers. We had a root beer in at one point. So different beverage types. I think we have about 111 SKUs, so different beverage products that are in our refillable bottles through some pretty recognizable brands. If you've had a Double Mountain or a Gigantic, they're probably our bigger refill partners, but they are exclusively in our refillable packaging. And so pretty cool to see that as kind of an additional advantage of the system. So that's it for my big formal slides there. But I want to show you, let me escape out of that and then I'll pop this up. So this is our processing plant right here. I always think it's kind of fun to get a look inside. This is where the massive mound of bags were in the photo that you saw. So I'm glad to see that they're all on racks right now. That's a good sign that things are a little bit healthier from a production standpoint. But a lot of people wonder, like, how's my bag counted, right? What happens, after I drop it off at the store? And so this is actually an aerial view of our counting system right here called Smart Count AI. This is patented technology that we developed at OBRC. But you see the operator here opens the bag. This is live, opens the bag and then spreads out the material on the belt there and then uses the QR code sticker on the bag to scan it there. That's the only thing that will advance that belt. And then this optical counter system right here uses advanced software and artificial intelligence and a neural network to recognize the containers by material type and also to count the containers. And then within like 10 seconds, the funds from those containers are uploaded directly to that customer's bottle drop account. And so each one of these devices can process about 200 bags an hour. there's around 70 containers in each bag. And so, you can think about like 20,000 containers per hour per device. So from a throughput perspective, you look at this, it's like 20,000, 40,000, 60,000, 80,000, 100,000 containers an hour at full steam that can run through it. And then let's see here, what else might be interesting to show you. This is the sortation equipment. Vinod will recognize some of these devices probably, but so on this belt, you've got glass, plastic, and metal, all coming off of that conveyor, and an eddy current system right here in the kind of the yellow piece. It shoots the aluminum up over that jump, and then that gets sent to an aluminum hopper. And then glass and plastic come through to this line. An air knife right here is a heavy blower that blows all the plastic out of the glass and into a plastic hopper. And then the glass comes up this conveyor right here and gets crushed into this tote right there. And so that's, when you think about like, how do you get the materials back apart from each other? It's through a system like that. So that's kind of the high level stuff. I offered to Thomas that if anybody, if your group ever wants to like come for a tour, it's kind of cool. We're always happy to bring groups through and show it to them, but that's those are the high points. So I'll stop there and happy to answer any questions that you have or anything else.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. That's really cool. We do love tours, so hopefully we'll get that scheduled.
Awesome.
In the near future. Yeah, I definitely had no idea on the volume of the bottles and the material that you guys take. So it's really interesting to see all of that. We can open up for questions, committee. So Sandra, go ahead.
Hi, when we drop off the green bags, you charge a 40-cent fee. I think it's 40 cents. It might have gone up by now. But where does that money go and why is that charged?
Yeah, so the 40-cent processing fee is that when the Green Bag program was introduced, it was sort of like a maximally convenient program. And so it replaced, standing on the sticky can room floor and putting them through a reverse vending machine one at a time. And so the processing fee, as an exchange for that, we have to figure out a way to get the containers counted and handle the material. In many cases, we have to haul, we call it hauling air, but we have to haul air from non-compacted material from one side to another instead of compacted material. And so there's some additional charges. But a couple things on the processing fee. One, that's at this point, that's just charged at redemption centers and bottle drop express sites. But at dealer redemption centers, which are all but one of the orange dots that I showed you on that map in Washington County, the retailer pays the processing fee on the customer's behalf. As part of their arrangement to have a reduced individual container take-back requirement. So if you drop it in any of those retail stores, with one exception, which is Beaverton Town Square Fred Meyer, which is a bottle drop express site that we added to help handle the volume, but they're within the convenience zone of the redemption center, so they don't actually have take-back responsibilities, but worked with us to make that voluntary access point available. But at all of the other orange dots on that map, there's no processing fee applied to the bag.
Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, Eric, I'm wondering, and maybe, I guess we could speculate all day, but what do you know about the wine industry or conversations with the wine industry coming into the bottle bill?
Yeah, it's been really interesting to watch those. We sort of represent ourselves as material agnostic. We process what we're told to process. And so we don't have a specific stake in whether or not wine comes into the bottle bill. But I imagine that it sounds like you keep your group apprised of public policy changes over time. And so you are all probably likely aware of the Recycling Modernization Act, the sort of EPR bill that passed in Oregon in 2021. And wine and liquor are included in the EPR system, and so they would be required to join a producer responsibility organization and pay fees and be part of that system, unless they petition the legislature and try to have their materials covered under the bottle bill. And during that session, there was some talk, I think, from the bill sponsors on, hey, they got to pick one. We'll either have them go into the bottle bill right now, or they'll go into EPR as the default. And so as an industry, they've been, I think, reviewing their options, for the last year and a half or so, and kind of trying to figure out which system they would want to be in most. And ultimately, I don't know where they'll land on that. I know that in California, the Wine Institute, which is one of the bigger wine lobbies, that's out there, lobbied hard to have wine included in their bottle bill when they passed their EPR bill recently. So wine was added in California. And so I don't know yet kind of where they'll sort out and come down. And it's not a monolith. There's like 3 different wine associations that all have slightly different perspectives and interests that they're looking at. And then how the grocers would feel about that. The retail take back has changed a lot, but grocery stores might not want to handle heavy glass, and might have an interest. So that's certainly something to keep an eye on. I do think, for the folks who work in the recycling space, if you got all of that glass out of the curb, do you need to do curbside glass pickup anymore? And is there an opportunity, to not have to deal with glass at the curb, which I know can be really challenging for a lot of operators and haulers. So there's a lot going on there. I don't know how it'll shake out, but if they don't, if it's not added before 2025, then they'll be, PRO members.
Go ahead, Pete.
Yeah, Eric. So wondering a little bit more about the reuse program that you have. I understand there's a matter of kind of hitting that Goldilocks sweet spot of not too big, not too small for this kind of thing to work. A couple of the brands I have seen as having used these containers, but where I shop, I don't normally see any of the product in those containers, except for at Fred Meyer when I see the Double Mountain IPA in the 12 ounce. So how does the consumer find out better on where to find these kinds of things? Because that obviously would help, generate more interest in them if consumers could figure out where to go out of their way to find them, to support it. And then I guess also a larger picture issue is that I know that the industry, the larger guys, are going a lot to aluminum cans, and even some of the smaller ones are, just because of their own ability to package locally, and it's more convenient in some ways, and they get some marketing out of the entire can and all that kind of stuff. But there's also the environmental trade-off of that, right? So aluminum is not the most friendly material environmentally, and certainly reused glass containers are time after time in LCA shown as the best system. So what's your view on how we make a larger scale change to adopting reuse more broad scale than the boutique way that we're doing it now?
Yeah, so great questions, and you're super smart on this issue. Your first question, you raised a great idea, which is that we totally need like a refill bottle finder on our website or something that would help. We could work with the brands on where they have them on the shelf and try to make a source available on our bottle drop site that would help people find that. So that's a really good idea. I often, just anecdotally, I think Fred Meyer in the region tends to stock Double Mountain and Gigantic in refill on the shelf. I've seen some that are just Double Mountain, others that are just Gigantic, some that don't have either. So I think some of those might be individual store decisions on who's getting shelf space and who's not. New Seasons tends to have the most robust variety of refill that I've seen out there. Where I've seen
Ricardo, I think there's some mix up on the audio, unless it was just me.
But yeah, so New Seasons has, I've seen Ancestry, Double Mountain, and Gigantic all sitting next to each other in refill bottles on the shelf there. So, and then Pierce and Cooper's Hall, I think, sells them just out of their tasting rooms, the wine suppliers. So yeah, that's a good idea.
I found a couple of Cooper's Hall at Fred Meyer, or no,
Oh,
it was
did
at
you?
Safeway. It was at Safeway, but it was on clearance, so that gave me a cue that they weren't that successful there, and they were getting.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
good. Well, it's good that they were in there. your observation about what's happened in the beer aisle is also spot on. You've seen just tons of shelf space that used to be glass that has shrunk down to, you know, a couple coolers at the end now, as more and more craft brewers go from glass bottles to aluminum cans. It is interesting. So Matt Swihart at Double Mountain, you know, he's our biggest partner. You can check out, he's got some really good stuff out there that kind of talks about this question. But we were taking a visiting tour through his tap room in Woodstock, and he did a little talk with the group a few months ago. And it was an element that we hadn't even really realized, but when beverage companies were dealing with supply chain issues that came, you know, as we came out of the pandemic, it was really hard for them to source packaging for a while. And even when they could source it, their prices were crazy, right? Because it was a supply and demand issue and the supply wasn't there. So, and Matt noted that he just laughed with his competitors the whole time because he always had a steady supply of refillable bottles available to him and the price didn't change. They were the same flat rate price that we always charged for the bottles. And so there's a resilience that I think is really a part of the program too, in terms of being able to have steady price and supply. And then the way that we have the program established is that the more bottles that come back, the cheaper they become. They're expensive on their first turn, but then they get more and more affordable each time they turn. And so there are some market advantages, I think, but some of it is just the trend. There is in the United States doesn't have any viable refill that's happening anywhere in anything but glass packaging. And we have maybe 2 million containers in circulation, but we're by far the nation's biggest program. And so we just have a long way to go to get there. Of course, we're big deposit return guys. And so from our perspective, having the collection infrastructure to facilitate it and then parallel policy is super important to be able to support things like refill. It's hard to think about how you would get refillable packaging back in the United States without a deposit return system. A lot of, big challenges there. Some of them are market challenges and some of them are policy challenges. But we're committed to the program and hope that it is at least a proof of concept that this can work here.
Great, thanks.
You got it.
Go ahead, Tom, question.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks, Eric. I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about your partnership with the Ground Score Association and Trash for Pieces program in Portland, and whether there's opportunity for more models like that in Washington County, for example. I know our team was working with some of our local housing providing agencies, and they were commenting on large quantities of cans stored on balconies and porches, and how do we help folks get those redeemed and maybe bring the redemption to them because they're challenged with transportation and other issues.
Yeah, totally. So one of the things that we've done sort of actually birthed out of COVID initially, because in the early days of the pandemic, and actually it lingered through half of 2021 in some places, but OLCC, which is our regulatory agency, suspended enforcement of retail returns during COVID because the stores were, so heavily hit with staffing issues and those types of things. And so, knowing that those, thousands of return points were going to go away, and the Bottle Drop Network was going to be the only thing for a little while where people could bring containers, we try to find a partnership where we could help support the people who are redeeming containers sort of every day, right? Your canners and gleaners, if you will. And so we found Ground Score that operates the People's Depot, and we partnered with them to provide kind of an alternative redemption access point for canners and gleaners. So they provide services every day underneath the Morrison Bridge, and they take back containers. They pay the refunds to the people that bring them there. We pick them up just like if they were a retailer. So our route operations picks them up on when they're out and about. Of course, we reimburse them for the refunds, and we provide them with operating funds as well to support their services. And so that was our first one. And then we actually just launched another one last year, which I'm really excited about. But there's a safe rest village in Eugene called Everyone Village. And they actually have like a warehouse facility that's connected to their village. And so we've installed 3 reverse vending machines on site at this Safe Rest Village in Eugene, where their villagers, and then starting soon, kind of anybody can return containers through the reverse vending machines, and they print a voucher and get cash just like they would at a grocery store. But it's right there on site, where they're living and receiving services. And so we support that one as well. I don't remember which one, but I talked to a housing provider or somebody. I talked to somebody in Washington County that was looking at a potential homeless shelter coming in, and I talked to him about, hey, would you want to incorporate something like that with the reverse vending machines or something as a service to the people using the shelter, so that they could redeem containers, on the spot at the shelter, and we again could pick them up just like a retailer. So we're always willing to explore those creative partnerships, and there's it's about $230 million a year that's redeemed in Oregon, and a lot of that is redeemed by people who, it's like dimes for dinner. Their next meal might depend on it, and so we want it to be, easy for everybody and accessible, and there's pain points. We've seen sort of the reverse vending machine floors at grocery stores sometimes, and maybe the machines aren't being well maintained by the store. The floors are sticky, it can be kind of tough. And so if we can help divert some of that volume in a way that's very focused and is connected to other services, all the better.
Yeah, that's really cool. Any other questions, committee members? Yep, Pete, please go ahead.
Yeah. So Eric, a couple other things on just, packaging issues. You said that all of your glass that you process goes to the OI FAC plant here over in the kind of northeast side of town. Yeah. So as you know, they've been struggling with some of their air quality issues, right? And there was something in the Willamette Week a bit ago about, don't shut it down because it'll kill the bottle bill, kind of, that was kind of the message. How much of that is hyperbole? I mean, do you believe that is the case? And then have you looked at some of the work that's been done around this cement substitute, pozzolan, for concrete? Because that's where, at least in the work that I work at DEQ, some of the work that we've done in the LCA department tells us that that's really the best environmental choice for glass as opposed to back into bottles. Back into bottles is okay, but pozzolan, because of the big impact of cement manufacturing in greenhouse emissions, is really the better choice if we had the choice. So if that plant does shut down, because you and I don't control that, OI does, right? Have you been looking at pozzolan or other alternatives for an outlet for glass?
Yeah, so the short answer is yes, kind of across the board, but obviously monitored the issues at OI very closely. Like I mentioned, we have a lot of glass. We have 90 million pounds of glass, and so it's a lot. And so we were deeply concerned that if that facility went away, we would be shipping glass who knows where at who knows what cost and what carbon impact. When you're taking a very heavy material and shipping it across the country or down to California to be turned into wine bottles or something. So having something really close to home is efficient, and carbon savings, are huge. So it's really important. We were very happy to see. I know the DEQ had taken some enforcement action, and they kind of had a choice of making the upgrades that they needed to be able to keep the air clean, or cease operations at that facility, and they elected to make the upgrades. So I think we're super happy to see them make those investments, so that they can protect the air quality, and we can keep having our material processed as close to home as possible. On the pozzolan, we've looked at it. Right now, at least, we have way too much glass, so that there's not enough of a market for it. It would be a small blip in the amount of glass that we process. And so it could totally be a solution at some point. And we're open to, all sorts of those types of opportunities. But right now at the volume that we deal in, bottle to bottle is absolutely the kind of the best opportunity.
Right. So on DEQ's side of things, if we were to help promulgate policy that allowed for a broader market development for Pozzolan, that would be something that you would have as available an alternative, for instance.
Yeah, I would, multiple channels where you're never going to hear us say that options are bad.
Right. Yeah. No, being an old time collector and operator of recycling facilities, yeah, having multiple markets is good.
Absolutely.
Right,
I mean, it
right,
really, yeah, it's scary when you think about the volume. That Willamette Week story had a photo of our glass that was set out on the floor. Like we had one day of glass set out on the floor, and the bottles and cans come back. It doesn't turn off. There's no stop. We have a really well-staffed mechanical team, because if we have a baler go down, we're in a lot of trouble, because it's not going to stop coming in. And so if we had a disruption in where we could send our glass, that would be really, really problematic for us. So yeah, options are awesome.
And just one last quick thing. My first experience with the Green Bag program wasn't all that great. I started with the onset of the pandemic, as probably a lot of other folks did, because they couldn't go into places where there were sticky floors, because those weren't available, because they're high touch areas and they're confined spaces with a lot of germs floating around. But I had several early on bad miscounts of my bag contents. It's gotten better, so I'm assuming the robot is learning and is doing a better job in its learning. I think the last several times it's been spot on. So congratulations for that. I'm always skeptical about AI, because when I call as a customer and I get a robot phone and it always wants to tell me, it assures me that it can understand me, and it always sends me to the wrong place. I'm glad in this case, it looks like this is a task that's capable for AI to handle.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry to hear that you had a tough situation, and
I reported it, and you all made good on it. So
okay, good. I was going to say, if that hasn't happened yet, let's make sure that we get that connected to our customer service team, which is
they were great,
which is both well staffed and humans. So you can talk to humans on our customer service. They're not robots. But yeah,
and they're not in Asia or South America either. No offense to those countries, but yeah, they're local folks.
They're right over there. And so but it is interesting. I mean, one, we've deployed the Smart Count more widely. We're continuing. I think when I started here, we had 2 of those on the line. And so, that's a growing piece of the way that we process the materials. But you're also absolutely right. When you call customer service, they can actually see your bag image, and they can see, oh, it missed this one. And they have a button in their system to press send for training. And so then that image will be used to reprogram the software. So it does continuously learn over time. And in our terms and conditions, we say it might be within a plus or minus 2 containers or something like that, because there's a certain amount of efficiency to the system when you're processing, approaching 12 million bags a year. But we want everybody to get every dime. And so certainly accuracy is critically important. I'm glad to hear your recent drops have gone well.
I'll stop after this, Ashwin, I promise.
You said you were going to be busy, Tom.
I know. My wife came home, so now I have all the time to ask all the questions. Eric, I'm curious, with all of your locations across the state, excuse me, I'm sure you've been involved in a lot of siting conversations or facility siting conversations. And when I'm looking at the RMA coming down the road, I'm looking at these depot convenience standards and these networks. And I look at Washington County and I see a very small number of depots. Far West in Hillsborough is one of our only big depots. Sherwood Pride has a depot at their facility. If we're going to add 40, 30, 15, 20, I don't know how many depots to Washington County, that's going to be a significant undertaking in terms of where they're going to be, what are the local rules and regulations. And I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about your experience with that, and then maybe if there's some strategies that we could start thinking about now to make that easier.
Yeah, every community is a little bit different. And as a former local government guy, I would probably hate myself to say, you see things from different angles at different points along the way. And, I'm a big firm believer in local control over land use and being able to have that kind of local component to it. I think there are some cases where it really makes sense for those codes to be at least a little bit flexible for those types of things. I showed you those images of shipping containers. It's, that's such an easy to deploy option. We can make them look nice. We can skin them however the store wants, and it's a pretty sleek, easy thing, essentially in a store parking lot. And so if we're, facing local governments, there was one community that I will not name in Oregon where it was almost impossible to get one of those bag drops sited. And we got it over the line. I was super proud to get there, but it was insane, the level of, I say this as a person who believes in the regulation and the land use, like it was really, really hard. And, it's like a mobile shipping container that can go anywhere and is really flexible and versatile. If you have to count it into bedrock for seismic purposes, we're maybe straying from kind of what we're trying to get accomplished. And so I do think that as part of the RMA, it might make sense to try to look at what some uniform permissions look like on different types of facilities, or at least eases those questions a little bit down the road. It can be challenging. Separately, we've actually looked at our network in the lens of the RMA and said, we don't have any interest in being a PRO, but can we be part of a solution for a PRO? So, if somebody's dealing with a covered product, we've got this network in place, and it might not make sense for every covered product, but maybe there are some, maybe if we take margarine containers that could, because they're kind of like beverage containers or something like that, or if wine doesn't get added to the bottle bill and is a PRO product, are we still a good return pathway for that product? So, there's opportunities like that potentially for industry cooperation. I don't know what those, might look like. We were just talking yesterday, we were at the plastics conference, and we were looking at a booth that had the rigid, six pack tops, that you see them a lot on craft brew. And we were looking at those and kind of wondering about well, we don't want them in the bags because they wouldn't sort out right, in our MRF, and they would count weird in our equipment. But what if we had a little mail slot on the side of every bag drop location where you could just slide that 6-pack ring in? And you're already dropping your beverage containers off. So if we made that available to consumers, is that a good solution for that? So we've looked at different things like that, kind of thinking about the network and what that represents and where we might be able to be helpful to broader recycling outcomes.
Can I go ahead?
Just on that vein, Eric, thanks for sharing all this information. I know when it was in Beaverton, and I don't know if that was the town. I don't know if that was your Voldemort or not, but
my predecessors had to climb that hill.
I remember watching some of those hearings because people were asking us how we had a depot, and just to Tom, they weren't. It was a return to retail, or it was a retail shop. It wasn't a recycling center. So that might be the differentiation that has to happen. Yeah,
that you're exactly right. You're both correct and have a very sharp memory. That was exactly what happened in Beaverton. It's the service that's being provided to consumers is container redemption. And so because that's a commercial service, then it complied with commercial zoning. And so, yeah, that certainly was. I will say, we do an annual report to the city of Beaverton to just update them on how things are going. And it's been interesting that we've actually had a 19% reduction in volume at that facility last year. And that's the overall container return volume in Washington County has gone up and has tracked with the redemption rate. But what it is people taking advantage of the green bag program and dropping them off at retail locations and having that take some pressure off of the vehicle trips and other things at the Beaverton facility. So it is it is nice to get that sorting out a little bit and have multiple return pathways for folks.
My memory is very selective, I'll admit that. And then just by the way, my first job at like 14 was sorting and counting bottles in the back of a grocery store. So you killed my career, Eric.
That's so funny. Honestly, I like in this job, one of the cool things is I get to talk to like hundreds and hundreds of people a year, and always about bottles and cans. And the number of people that have that story is huge. And the number of people in the legislature who have that story is huge. Like I'll be talking to legislators or taking them through our facility, and they're like, I know all about the bottle bill. I used to sort cans in the back of Snyder's. It's just awesome. It's cool that people have like just sort of deep DNA connections to it. And also, for the people who are running the can rooms, maybe not such fond memories of it.
Lots of bees. I remember bees.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
I just want to quickly add that my first real environmental activism was being a petition gatherer in Michigan in 1976 for the then 1978 bottle bill. So that was my first foray into this activism stuff. And it's,
That's awesome.
40, almost 50 years later, and it's succeeding in many places.
Yeah, it is.
Including still in Michigan, even though we don't there have the same kind of network. It's still very much reverse vending supported and a lot of sticky floors.
Yeah, so Michigan's interesting. It's funny, we were just talking to the Shupan folks yesterday who operate that system, and they have a lot fewer containers in their bottle bill. About 88% of containers are in Oregon. In Michigan, it's about 57%, and so the retail return piece is huge, and their facilities are different than what you see here. I mean, it is kind of a sticky can room floor, but not in the way that you would see it in some other places. And they also have like a lot less curbside recycling in Michigan, and so if people care at all about recycling, they kind of have one path for beverage containers. But it's a successful system that's getting good outcomes, and it's interesting to look at kind of the different policies around the issue. I'll share just a lightly political story, but my mom told me a story. She was recently talking to her brother, who's kind of on the conservative end of the political spectrum, but and he was asking, what does Eric do? And so she was talking to him about it, and he said, supported the bottle bill in Oregon, and then I moved to Michigan, and I supported the bottle bill in Michigan, and then I moved to a state that doesn't have one. He lives in Washington now, and you see the litter everywhere, and it is interesting in the way, like, it's a policy item that can cut through in different ways, and it's neat to see that those are still out there.
Just like the "Don't mess with Texas" slogan, even they don't like trash.
Yeah, it was Tom McCall, the maker of many Oregon slogans, who was an important champion of the bottle bill after not being a champion of the bottle bill the preceding session. But he got to the right spot and pushed it over the line.
I had a quick question, Eric. The bags, you guys recycle those also?
Yeah, so the bags are tough. Film recycling is hard, but we do get them recycled. We've worked really hard to try to get our bag manufacturer to take our own film back and wash it and pelletize it so that it goes back into bags again. It's hard. It's really hard because they're sticky. Sometimes like a crown cap will get stuck to the bag. So we've done a variety of recycling options for them, but we do bail them all up and we get them recycled. Not always circularly, but that's our North Star on the bags. We definitely want to have a bag to bag opportunity on that.
That's cool. Any final questions, committee members? I want to take up all of Eric's evening, but no, thank you for coming.
This is the fun stuff. I appreciate your guys' interest in it. You get a group like this that's like pretty into recycling for obvious reasons, and it's just neat to geek out a little bit. The rest of my friends are tired of talking about it, so thanks for the invitation to come and join us.
You have a bunch of new friends now who would be happy to come over for dinner and talk about bottles. So.
Awesome.
Well, thank you. Thanks.
Yeah, you bet.
Awesome.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Eric.
You bet. So I'll excuse myself, and yeah, have a great evening.
And we'll follow up about this tour idea.
Yeah, we'd love to host you. Absolutely.
Cool.
Thanks.
Great. So we can move to the last item on the agenda, which is open oral communication. If anybody from the public attendee would like to ask a question or comment, your opportunity is now if you want to use the raise a hand feature. Doesn't look like it. So, well, thanks everybody. It was a really fun discussion. Hope everybody else enjoyed it too. Have a good rest of
Absolutely.
the evening.
Thanks, Ashvin. Thanks, everybody. Have a good evening.
See you in May and hopefully April's volunteer celebration.
Bye.
Así sea. Buenas noches. Gracias. Hasta luego.
Thank you for attending the March 9th Garbage and Recycling Advisory Committee meeting. As expressed at the beginning, this meeting was recorded and will be posted to our website within 1 week. Thank you.